Wouldn't it be nice to have several thought leaders in your industry know and love your brand? Start a podcast. Invite your industry's thought leaders to be guests on your show and start reaping the benefits of having a network full of industry influencers. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. We're here today with Jill Rowley, Chief Growth Officer at Marketo. Jill, how are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. How are you, Logan?
I'm doing really well, Jill. Well, thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have you on as a repeat guest here on B2B Growth. So thank you for joining us. For folks out there that maybe didn't hear your last interview or would like a little bit of context about why you're going to share on our topic today of balancing sincerity and science in sales, if you could just share with us a little bit what you and the team are up to at Marketo these days.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I joined Marketo in December of 2017, and I had actually no plans to ever re-enter the corporate workforce. I had spent the prior 4 years building my own business and my personal brand, whereby I was spending a lot of time doing professional speaking on the topic of digital sales transformation. And a lot of my career has been spent driving marketing transformation and digital marketing transformation. And I'd learned a lot about the modern buyer through that work and realized that marketing had been doing some incredible work to evolve and really adapt to the modern buyer, but sales was largely still stuck in the old world of smile and dial, pounce and pitch. And not really in the new world of educate and engage and reach and teach our customers. So I met Steve Lucas, the CEO of Marketo, back in May of 2017. And before I met him, I watched a video of Steve talking about his first 60 days at Marketo. And Logan, I was literally like, I got goosebumps. I was blown away because what I saw was the new CEO of Marketo talking about the MarTech 2.0 world that I had started to envision, where we shift from a world of marketing automation to a world of engagement. And, Steve had said, nobody wants to be marketed to. And I had been out there preaching, nobody wants to be sold. And when Steve was talking about this transformation of the buyer from a marketing to an engagement, it got me excited about, is Marketo the company to drive that technical, right? So one, we can evangelize a message of engagement. Sure. Engagement economy, engagement era, great. But from a product perspective, can a 12-year-old company that's rooted in marketing automation really transform into an engagement platform?
Yeah.
So I joined to try.
Hey, well, it's lofty goal, but I love the direction of it. It's funny how often in sales or marketing conversations, we ask our sales peers, if you're doing that, would you like to be sold to that way? Well, no, I wouldn't. Or, you ask a marketer, would you respond to that campaign? Well, no, I wouldn't. So, thinking about the way that we like to be engaged with, and having that drive the way that we drive engagement, with our audience, I think is it's a phenomenal topic. And so within that, Jill, we want to talk about, how do we balance science and sincerity in sales. And the first thing that you brought up when you and I were talking about this topic before the interview was a new definition of ACV. Unpack that for us and tell us where that fits into this conversation.
Yeah. So the current definition of ACV is annual contract value.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've grown up in SaaS. I joined Salesforce.com back in 2000. So I was one of the first, 20 some salespeople at Salesforce.com.
Mm-hmm.
And Salesforce was the pioneer of the subscription model and, browser-based software delivered as a service. And ACV, ARR, MRR, so annual recurring revenue, monthly recurring revenue, those are all very common terms in the SaaS subscription world. And a lot of, the board level reporting is very much focused on, how are you growing the average annual contract value? And what I think we need to be more focused on is what ultimately we need to drive is the actual customer value and who within our organization at every step of the way, starting from product, right? How are we designing our products so that our products drive actual customer value? And we have to think about who is our customer, right? And so, if your customer is a big, complex global enterprise, then you need to be designing capabilities that support the needs and requirements of that big global enterprise customer. So it starts even with, your products. If your buyer is someone who is non-technical, but you have a highly technically configurable product, how are you making that configuration really super easy through,
what's your onboarding like and all that sort of stuff?
Exactly. So actual customer value has to be something that you think of throughout. I always say no more shitty products. Marketing, no more false advertising in your marketing messaging, right? So we'll oftentimes see a trend come about and everyone will jump on that buzzword, bandwagon and start to talk about, AI and machine learning and say that their platform is an AI driven blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Everybody's got AI and machine learning these days.
Yeah.
I saw someone post on LinkedIn, like the amount of traction you get or click throughs on something, a webinar or something, whether they use the words AI and machine learning or not. And obviously with AI and machine learning, their click-through rate was much, much higher, but that's not really driving customer value if that's not really a part of your product. And if you're playing fast and loose with those buzzword terms, right?
That's exactly right. So, we really have to be focused on messaging what the value is that we deliver to, our actual value that we deliver to our customers. From a sales perspective, it's really important that salespeople know their customers deeply so that they can actually help the customer solve whatever business problem or whatever goal that business is trying to achieve. If you don't know me, how can you actually help me achieve value?
Right. Yeah. So it's from product, it's from sales, it's from marketing. The idea is how can we create value for the customer experience at every touch point? And, if we kind of narrow that focus, Jill, into sales, you touched on this friction that's hindering this in sales, right? The friction of sales leaders looking at activity metrics, buyers wanted personalized selling. Tell us a little bit about what you see that environment being like, in most of our organizations. I think, our audience is going to be nodding our head as you kind of described, because I think it's a common thing.
Yeah, it's still very much, we're very much living in an activity driven sales environment where sales reps are measured on the things that are easily measured, right? It's actually quite easy to measure phone calls. It's quite easy to measure emails sent. It's quite easy to measure demos delivered. Those are activities that are easy to measure. Oftentimes because we've got technology that integrates with our CRM system. So there are lots of technologies that will log emails directly into your CRM system.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can run reports in the CRM system to see which of your salespeople have sent the most emails. And that is not a measure. Not only is it not a measure to customer value, but it's not a measure to strength of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, oftentimes those high activity metrics lead to negative brand impressions.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's so crazy how many stupid emails I receive that I am not the buyer for.
Right.
Not only am I not the buyer within Marketo is not the ideal customer for what is being pitched.
Yeah, the spray and pray model is hitting you wrong on both points. Like, not only is the organization not a fit, but you're not within their ICP anyway.
Yeah, and if you're sending me an email, that's the third wrong, because now that every marketer and every salesperson on the planet has everybody's email address and the ability to automate a series cadence sequence of emails to everybody, it is a lot harder to get my attention in email.
Right.
If you know me, if you have gone and you have Googled Jill Rowley and you have looked at my LinkedIn profile, if you have on my LinkedIn profile, there's a link to my Twitter. If you have followed me or even just looked at what I tweet about, you will know not to send me generic scripted stuff. That is not how you're going to engage me.
Yep.
So you might be hitting all your activity metrics that your sales leadership team is making you hit, but you're not building healthy relationships based on value.
Yep. You're not building a relationship with many buyers that are very much like you, Jill. I read a tweet from Jay Acunzo just last night talking about, areas where he focused in and was focusing more on resonance instead of reach. And I think that falls very much in line with what I hear you saying. So I love that.
Today's growth story revolves around search engine marketing. Delphix, a big data platform, had hired an agency to manage their Google ads a few years ago, but they weren't seeing the results they wanted to see. Being such a technical B2B solution, they set out to find a team that could take on their challenge. After countless proposals, they found the perfect fit: Directive Consulting, the B2B search marketing agency. In just 1 week after launching Directive's campaigns, Delphix saw their lead volume double and their cost per lead drop by 60%. I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
So that's the friction. We're trying to get to actual customer value and actually valuing that as our ACV. So you had three ways that you think that sales leaders can set up their teams and sales practitioners can go about doing this on a daily basis. So it revolves around this methodology of knowing more, caring more, and doing more. So talk to us about how sales professionals can go about knowing more. I think you mentioned, it starts with listening.
That's right. So we have to know more about our customers. We have to care more about our customers, and we have to do more for our customers. And the way that we go about this is we need to listen to our customers, where our customers are having conversations. Where can we find information about our customers and what they care about? One example, let me just give you, I like to be very specific. So
perfect. We love it.
I listen to a lot of podcasts, as probably many of your listeners do. And, I listen to a lot of podcasts about marketing and leveraging technology to drive growth in marketing. And just so happens that Marketo sells technology to marketers that helps drive growth. So, wow, isn't that funny that I would listen to a podcast about how you can use technology to drive growth in marketing? That seems like I would want to know more about the world in which my customers live. And yes, I do. And so I was listening to this podcast, Demand Gen Radio, a guy named Dave Lewis. He's the CEO of Demand Gen. We go back over a decade, actually over a decade and a half because my youngest daughter is turning 14, and Dave and I were on the phone when I was in the delivery room working on a contract. So I was listening to this episode number 63, How to Lead a Marketing Operations Team. And it was an interview with a gentleman named Scott Burns, who's the director of marketing ops at CenturyLink. CenturyLink is a Marketo customer and an award-winning Marketo customer. They've just done incredible work within their organization. And Scott has built his marketing ops team from very little to very large. And what Scott was talking about is really how revenue has to be the measure, right? They look at things from an outcomes perspective, and that's how they start to, evaluate any investments in their stack and also in their team. And so, me listening to that podcast took time out of my ability to make calls and send emails. And so if, someone was looking at that from a traditional sales leadership perspective of an activity driven,
right.
It took me 20 minutes to listen to that podcast. And then it took me another, 4 to 5 minutes to actually compose a tweet to share a link to that podcast. And then another 5 minutes to compose the LinkedIn share to share it across my social network, tagging Scott and Dave Lewis from Demand Gen and Kate on Scott's team. But the meaning and the value for one, if I was wearing a sales rep hat, for me as a sales rep to know more about my customer, two, to care more about them, because like I share it so that I can shine the spotlight on Scott and his team at CenturyLink for the great work that they're doing, because I want to care more and I want to do more for them to shine the spotlight on what they're doing. Like those are non-traditional activities that should be valued at the sales leader level within an organization. It's just we don't have room for them when you're measured on volume, not value.
Yep. But the thing that made it very valuable was that you're not doing that for anybody and everybody. You targeted in very strategically on who you were going to spend that extra time to build that resonance rather than just reach, like you said, as opposed to just spraying, people like yourself, like the emails you're getting where you're not the buyer and Marketo's not a fit. As long as you're starting with this customer fit that and then you're engaging, then that makes sense. And there's a lot of ways to speed that up. I love your idea of listening to a podcast to find out about, what your buyers are concerned about. One thing I've done is turned up my podcast speed to 1.5 or 2 times speed. We can listen a lot faster than we talk, and you can listen to a podcast at faster than 1x and still be able to get the value and get the meat of that content to be able to, relay it or use that in the engagement that you're going to do, right?
Well, that's a trick. I mean, not a trick, but a technique, I should say, because I do the same thing. I listen to them at 1.5 or 2, and then I stop. Like I'll stop the podcast. Like on Scott's, for example, he was actually talking about a product that they're betaing for us and how they have been doing a lot to break the product, which is fabulous. Like I love that. And so within that, I want to capture that quote that he was mentioning about that new product and share that with the product team who is, working with him in the beta perspective, to let them know that the work that they're doing with Scott is appreciated, right? He's actually talking about it. So, and again, that's a different approach to one, the customer and the relationship with the customer, the resonance, if you will, right? So I've defined social selling as not using social media, because social media is about reach and that's what marketing does, but using social networks. And networks are about relationships, and that's what salespeople do. And using these networks to do research on the buyer, to be relevant to the buyer, to build better relationships, not to become, a thought leader. Like I wrote a post a while back about salespeople shouldn't be thought leaders. They should be subject matter experts. They should be trusted advisors. But I'm not saying that every salesperson needs to build the most incredible personal brand and be perceived as a thought leader in their buyer's world. That's not an achievable goal for the masses of folks who are in sales.
Right. Or they claim that status before it's actually achieved, right? Even worse, I think.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Label yourself a thought leader. Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah. Well, I love how you flip the script on social, and I think that's the way that a lot more salespeople need to be using social. Use it as listening rather than a microphone first. And there's things that you can do, like listening to a podcast at 2x. You can build lists on Twitter. You mentioned, and I saw obviously before we connected, that you're very active on Twitter. You can build even private lists to add, people that you want to engage with on Twitter, so that you can easily see what your audience is talking about and look for those prime opportunities to engage. Did they just get named to the Fearless 50 marketing list, or, what other sort of trigger could strike up a conversation so that it's not the smile and dial mentality. I love that. I've come from a world in 10 years of B2B sales that was very much smile and dial and hit your 50 to 100 calls and that activity benchmark. While, the activity is important, if it's not the right activity, then it's not going to engage the right buyers.
That's a leadership issue. I mean, Logan, this really is when you have, and this is going to sound ageist, but when you have, 55-year-old sales leader running the sales organization who hasn't really figured out that digital and social are incredible channels for not only engaging but understanding and researching, then you've got a cultural issue. And so what you have to, the way I describe it is not about the digital and social channels, it's about the customer. And really the first thing that customers notice is how well your sales team understands them, right? Like, do you know me? Do you know my role? Do you know my challenges? Do you know my industry? Do you know what I'm trying to achieve? And if we're not training and enabling our salespeople on how to know thy customer, how to listen and learn and engage with this modern customer, how to do more for the customer, if we're not training and enabling the sales team, then shame on us as a sales leadership.
Yeah. Well, Jill, this has been a great conversation. As I mentioned at the top, I love anything that hits on this topic of, doing more engagement and creating more relationships in selling, bringing the social into social media. And I love the example that you shared, with your customer and the way that you're doing it. I think a lot of folks out there are going to learn something from this, take something, be able to apply it right away. If folks want to follow you, stay connected with you, reach out to you, Jill, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
Yeah. So love Twitter, because I really do like to engage in real time. And every tweet that I send is sent by me, and it's sent when it appears to be sent. Like, I don't schedule tweets. I actually use Twitter too. You mentioned creating Twitter lists. I'll even set it up that if I'm trying to build a relationship with a specific individual, I will set it up that I get alerted in real time anytime that person sends a tweet. So there are certain people who I need to know exactly what they're doing, when they're doing it, and what they're sharing on Twitter. And so I had that set up.
I love it.
So Twitter, at Jill_Rowley on Twitter. And then LinkedIn, but you cannot send me a generic invite. I get way too many generic invites. I will have no idea that you heard about me or liked what I said in this podcast if you don't tell me that when you send me an invite to connect on LinkedIn. So I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn, but the generic invites have to stop.
With that caveat, reach out to Jill on LinkedIn, follow her on Twitter, find a way to engage. I love it. This has been a great conversation, Jill. Thank you so much for coming on the show again.
Yeah, thanks, Logan. And I'm glad Toby didn't bark or your kids didn't bother you.
I think we made it through and we hit on some good topics with no interruptions. It was awesome.
We sure did. Thanks so much, Logan.
There are lots of ways to build a community, and we've chosen to build the B2B growth community through this podcast. But because of the way podcasts work, it's really hard to engage with our listeners. And without engagement, it's tough to build a great community. So here's what we've decided to do. We're organizing small dinners across the country with our listeners and guests. No sales pitches, no agenda, just great conversations with like-minded people. We'll talk business, we'll talk family, we'll talk goals and dreams. We'll build friendships. So if you'd like to be a part of a B2B growth dinner in a city near you, go to b2bgrowthdinners.com. That's b2bgrowthdinners.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.